Did you remember the active transport quiz that we have tomorrow?
Since when?
You always forget. Don't worry, I'll help you study.
Okay, let's start with the basics. True or false? Active transport is the same thing as facilitated diffusion.
False?
Yeah, you're right. Facilitated diffusion is also called passive transport, which does not require energy. Active transport requires some form of chemical energy, otherwise known as ATP. It requires energy because the particles are moving against the concentration gradient.
So does the ATP stay after it's used?
No, it's actually just a one-time use. Once you use it, it's gone. Let's move on, since you already kind of know a little bit about that. How about if you know anything about endo or exocytosis?
I think both uses active transport.
Yeah, they do, otherwise we wouldn't be studying them. Of course they use active transport. But what are the differences between the two?
So endocytosis is since it's endo, I think of how since the molecules from the outside of the cell is too big to use passive transport, they use ATP after engulfing the molecule, and they go against the concentration gradient. That's why they use active transport because it's too big to go against it.
Okay, that's good, but what about exocytosis? What do you know about that?
For exocytosis, because the cell needs to remove waste, they use vesicles to contain the waste, and it should go against the concentration gradient to push it outside of the cell. Wow, I actually think I know something.
Endocytosis, now that you know that, has two processes. There's phagocytosis and there's pinocytosis. Can you tell me the difference between those two?
Okay, so for phagocytosis on the book, it says that it's cell eating. Basically, they take large molecules and they form large vesicles, and basically some of them are receptor mediated is what I remember, and they are triggered by receptors on the cell membranes when it's touched by something.
Okay, that's good. Do you know anything about pinocytosis?
It doesn't really mention what it's used for.
So when I think of pinocytosis, I think of Pinot Noir. My parents drink it every night. That's what the cell does. It drinks up the extracellular fluid. That's how it's primarily used.
So do you know anything about the sodium glucose pump?
Okay, so according to the book, it's a form of active transport, but it doesn't use ATP. It has a concentration gradient of sodium. The sodium gradient is created by the sodium-potassium pump, which does utilize ATP.
So basically, sodium glucose pump profits off of sodium potassium pump, and so basically, since it doesn't use ATP, but it's profits off of the sodium concentration gradient, it's a secondary active transport.
Yeah, you got that right. Now tell me how the sodium-potassium pump works.
So the book says that the ions will bind to the channels, the protein channels, and since ATP is required to transport the ions, the phosphate group, it says one phosphate group will stay with the ATP, and then it binds to the channel, which releases the sodium ions.
Good. You've learned everything I can teach you. There's active transport, which includes endocytosis, exocytosis, and the two pumps. Now, let's start quizzing each other with some questions.